Hello and welcome, everyone. I want to give a warm welcome to Clifford Earl Terry. We call him Earl. His first name is Clifford, but he goes by Earl. He's from Phoenix, Arizona, born and raised, and he attended the Phoenix Residential School for the Deaf. After he graduated from there, he went to Gallaudet University and studied communication. After that, he studied ASL communication, ASL education there at Gallaudet. For 10 years, he worked as an advocate for the deaf community there in Washington, D.C. And then in 2013, he relocated to Rochester, New York. Currently, he teaches ASL courses both at University of Rochester and MCC. Now, please allow me to introduce Earl Terry. Hello, everyone. This is my name sign, a 3 on the chest. I'll give you a little bit of my background information as to why that's my name sign. My siblings and I were all born and raised in Phoenix, Arizona, and my brother and I are deaf. My sister, who's just below my younger brother, actually is an American Sign Language interpreter. So growing up, I used to tell my brother and sister stories about school, about our family, all in ASL, and they absolutely loved that. So back to why my name sign is a 3 on the chest. Well, I'm actually the third in line of Cliffords. My grandfather and my father are both Clifford, and I'm the third. My presentation today is on orature in Black deaf communities. Orature is an amalgam of 2 words, oral and literature, to become a new word, orature. And I'm not the person who coined this term. It's actually a loan word from African American studies. Researchers found that stories in African American communities have mostly not been documented. In their research, they found that stories and history and culture was passed down orally, and they came up with this word of orature. And I liked that, so I decided to use it in my presentation. As JT mentioned, I did graduate from Gallaudet University with my master's in ASL education. Students who came into this graduate program were able to study languages and teach them, such as Mexican Sign Language, ASL, and a variety of other languages, but I focused on ASL myself. During my time in grad school, I had to pick an immersion, and I thought I was going to do something related to drama or some type of history. But as I did my own research, I found a lot of information on Black ASL, and I thought, oh my goodness, I need to share this with the community. You'll notice most of the things in my presentation here today are video clips, but I'll briefly summarize them for you today. You guys know what Black ASL is, right? Okay, are you familiar with the Black ASL project? It involved Carolyn McCaskill, Joseph Hill, and 2 other researchers who did a lot of digging into Black ASL and eventually published a book. This book is fantastic. It actually came with a DVD as well. Dr. Hill and his research team captured a lot of raw emotional videos during his research of Black ASL communities. He wanted to capture the signing differences for people in age 55 and above and people below the age of 55. The reason he separated them into those groups is because the people 55 and older had gone through Jim Crow laws and segregation. However, the people under 55 were mainstreamed at some point and went to school with their white peers. The book that I just showed you was absolutely inspirational to me, and there's a lot of information from it that I would like to share with you all today. ASL literature and Black ASL literature are not equal. The reason for this, I'll explain a little bit later. I mentioned segregation before in terms of Jim Crow laws. These laws passed in the late 1800s, 1877 to be precise. That law stated that whites and blacks could be separate but equal. Now, these laws continued until it was overruled in the Supreme Court in the case Brown versus the Board of Education. They ruled the law to be unconstitutional and that all schools had to be integrated. Now, the Supreme Court didn't set a deadline, but they said it had to be over by the 1950s. NAD wasn't established until the 1980s, but one of the primary reasons it was established was to preserve ASL and ASL culture. With the advent of television and videos, people wanted to make sure that they captured ASL culture. So once they were able to afford all of these things, the NAD started documenting a lot of ASL culture and history. If you're familiar with George Feditz, he did a lot of research into preserving ASL and got a lot of those things on tape. However, black students back then didn't have that. The black deaf schools didn't have the ability to afford the video recorders. So back then, some white teachers actually saw these students signing and decided they wanted to capture their signing on video as well. One example of these white teachers was Douglas Craig.
So Douglas Craig's last name comes from a white male that found him and gave him his same last name, Craig. Now, Douglas Craig, he worked as a handyman, and he was well loved. He had a very endearing personality. He was very funny, and actually in the video, you would see more of his personality. He was very funny, had a helpless disposition, and also you could see a little bit of the lack of education that he had. He actually passed away in 1936. So the research team visited schools in these 6 states. So the Jim Crow era, or the laws, were actually abolished in the 1950s, but the last residential school to actually desegregate was Louisiana School for the Deaf, and that was in 1970s. Or excuse me, I got a correction from the audience. That's 1978. And so desegregation happened, and finally, 20 years later, Louisiana School for the Deaf actually desegregated. But imagine that was only 50 years ago. And when you look at these schools, do you think that they were called appropriately schools for the Black deaf community? Absolutely not. Take a look at these names. They use the word like Negro and colored and deaf and mute. So this was the terminology that was used in that era. These schools unfortunately have disbanded because after desegregation, the students that were attending Black deaf schools were bussed over to be mainstreamed in white schools. You may recall me saying that I was in the Master of ASL Education program. And while I was there, I was asked, what is my passion? And I mentioned that I was involved with literature and theater and so on and so forth. But I was recommended to become a professor. And I said, well, that's interesting. I never thought about that. So I decided to cultivate my skills, engage in a lot of research, and I garnered a lot of information in various categories. One of these categories is personal experience narratives that incorporates Black deaf jokes, songs, films and stories and all types of literature that focuses on the Black Deaf language and experience and culture. And so I ended up developing several units. I think it was about 7 total, of varying topics. Pretty much developed an entire curriculum, sent it over to the powers that be, and they were super impressed. So yes, I do feel like I want to teach Black ASL in an ASL class, but unfortunately there's not enough research for today's Black ASL because the research team in their findings only documented Black ASL from 1950 and before. So anything thereafter, we do not have significant research to validate it. Now, intuitively and innately, yes, we know that there is Black ASL. It has its own linguistic features and nuances, but we just need the research to validate that, to see if things have evolved from the 1950s or use mainstream ASL. But personally, I just know that there's a difference between Black ASL and white ASL. In this video, we're actually talking about features of Black ASL, and Joseph Hill is denoting or comparing and contrasting the differences between Black ASL and white ASL. You may notice that Black ASL is two-handed for the sign, I don't know, and also the location of this sign is lower on the face. And also the signing space for mainstream ASL is pretty standard. It pretty much frames the upper torso of the body, but that's not necessarily the case in Black ASL. It pretty much obliterates the standard signing box, and it's intentional, and it's a way that Black individuals express themselves, which is distinct from a mainstream or white ASL. Are we familiar with AAE, African American English? Again, that's AAE, or maybe another term that you may be familiar with is Ebonics or Black English. It used to be called a fake language or broken English, but in fact, that's not the case. Black English has its own distinct way of being expressed and its own terminology and its own form. And in the same way, Black ASL has its own form. And in fact, words that were said in African American English, like a word, man, or my bad, or that's tight, those are words that are used in African American English, but they were also incorporated into Black ASL. You may see this older gentleman in the middle. His name is John Shields. Somebody came to his home and for about an hour and a half asked him question after question about his educational experience, about the professors in Kendall Elementary School for the Deaf. He went to school from 1878 to 1903. And he said that, yes, some of the professors were actually mean to him, and he was very clear and did not hold anything back in his narratives. But he did say that there were other professors that were much more accommodating and supportive of him and other Black deaf individuals. And you can actually watch the video in its entirety in the Gallaudet Library. It's an hour and a half, but it's very interesting. I will say that his signing style is sometimes hard to understand. I did understand some things, while other things are a little bit more complicated because the way that they sign in that day is different than how we sign today. Anyway, John Shields met Edward Minor Gallaudet, and Edward Minor would take note of any deaf child and then enroll them into Kendall Demonstration Elementary School. And so a lot of individuals are super grateful to him. This is the Maryland School for the Colored, Deaf, and Blind. You may notice Dr. Ernest Hairston. In this picture, this is a class of 52. I'm sorry, this is not Maryland. This is the Virginia School for the Deaf. So here we have Dr. Ernest Hairston. In his experiences, he talks about what it was like for a Black deaf man or a Black deaf individual. He initially attended a Black deaf school, and when the law came to desegregate, he was bused over to white schools, and he had been using Black ASL, but then his white counterparts did not understand and not really appreciate, even degraded Black ASL, and that was obviously demoralizing. And so he felt that he had to get rid of or ditch his Black ASL in order to feel more assimilated into his new community. But he actually went on to become the founder of the National Black Deaf Advocates. So in this segment, he talks about a Black deaf man going to a Black deaf school would actually learn vocational topics such as custodial work or barbering or lawn care. And the women would learn sewing or stitching, cooking, I guess you would call the typical housewife duties. This is in contrast to the white schools. They were learning more traditional topics like history and science and English and math. It was a much more advanced education, which was completely different than what was taught in Black deaf schools. Here we have Dr. Nathy Marbury. She passed away in 2013. We miss her dearly. She is really one of my favorite individuals. She talked about her experiences in the church, in the family, interacting in residential schools. And one of my favorite stories is when she talks about the Ajax. I'm sure you know about the cleaning supplies where it was rubbed on individuals' skin. And she really shows what it was like for a Black deaf person in those days, the suffering and the oppression that they experienced. I actually have a personal story for you guys. I went to Phoenix School for the Deaf. We did not have any dorms, so I was bused back and forth to school. And at that time, I had an afro, like a big afro. And I loved just hanging out and talk with all the students there. So one day I was headed back home. Once I walked in the door, my mother took one look at me and was so mad. She was absolutely livid because she saw pencils, puzzle pieces, other types of dirty objects, random objects, branches, whatever, you name it. She found all these things in my afro. And that happened for what? Like, I would say maybe 4 or 5 years consistently. And my mother just was fed up with the whole thing. And she ended up shaving my afro.
So, those were some experiences from the perspective of a Black deaf man. Now, I'm going to show you something different. This is the experience of Black deaf women. It's somewhat similar, but also completely different. These two Black women are fantastic. The first one is Michelle Banks, and the second is Jade Bryant. Jade Bryant is a movie producer, and Banks is an actress. Jade is an actress as well, but I'm going to focus on some of the things that she produced. In the top photo up here is a picture of Michelle Banks in a film called Reflection of a Black Deaf Woman. In that film, she describes what the experience of being a Black deaf woman is like. Here's another movie that was directed by Jade Bryant. It's called If You Could Only Hear My Tune. Here's another film called The Shattered Mind. I'll summarize these briefly for you all. This film talks about a Black deaf woman in search of a lover, and she actually falls in love with a musician who's hearing. This film talks about a family with a deep, dark secret. It stars a little Black deaf girl, and the secret is how she became deaf. I'll keep it at that. I'm not going to spoil it for you all. If you all remember, I mentioned the small signing space that typical ASL has. This is Fred Beam. He's an actor, a multimedia artist, a dancer, a director. He wears many hats. And this video is a perfect example of signing space. So hopefully you all can see this video here.
So I'm not going to actually perform for you guys today. I'm just going to summarize what this show is about. So it's actually a comedy show that I did a few years back. Actually, I still perform it from time to time. The theme or the idea is Black ASL is not better, it's just different. So in this segment, I'm actually talking about the interpreter. So we'll throw out different words, and each interpreter has different backgrounds. So we have one interpreter that has absolutely no experience. We have another interpreter that is culturally competent, and then we have a Black interpreter. And so we throw out a particular words to see how each interpreter communicates it into ASL. So there's a lot of comparison of cultures. We have the mainstream deaf community and the Black deaf community, and then the Black speaking community compared with the white speaking community. So this is just one of my works for you guys.
I have one thing to add on and expand on to what Fred just said. The first person in the video was just learning sign language. The second person was a white sign language interpreter. And the third person was a Black interpreter. And in this, they asked, "What is your sign for what's up?" The new signer signed, "What is up?" The second person signed, "What's up?" And the third person signed, "What's up?"
So we have this first interpreter that is not culturally competent. And then we have another interpreter all the way over here that is the Black interpreter who is culturally competent. And so we'll have a word thrown out. Let's say the word is "what's up." The first interpreter, who is skilled but not culturally competent, would sign it like this. "What's up?" You notice the signing space, right? The second interpreter would say, "What is up?" Because they may be culturally competent, but they don't have the skills yet. Then you have the third interpreter, way out of the signing space, and they're saying, "What's up?" And others would give feedback, "Hey, your signing space is too big." And it's like, "Okay, let me adjust, sorry. Hey, what up, man? What up, man?" So either way it goes, Black interpreter is just going to fit the culture a little bit better. Let's see if we can find another word. And the actual word is "word." The first interpreter would sign it appropriately, but you notice the signing space. It doesn't necessarily match the culture. The second interpreter, again, culturally competent, but not skilled just yet would say it like this, like word as an lexical item, but then the third interpreter would say a word, man, word. Look at the difference. You have the first interpreter who signs it appropriately, but the signing box is a bit subdued for Black ASL. You gotta move it way above the head. Look at it like that, a word, man. And that's just how we do it, as high as the hand can go. So the first interpreter apparently needs to be baptized in the Black ASL.
So that right there at the end, the way he signed word at the end, it was way above his signing space. The top image is from DPAN. It stars Aaron Loggins. You guys know who Aaron Loggins is, right? He was just at this past Super Bowl. He was the black deaf man performing the national anthem in American Sign Language. I think this music video is amazing. It's a realistic representation of how black deaf people express themselves in the world in terms of their relationship with God and how they love to sign music. I think it's beautiful. If you've got time later, I think you guys should view You Bring Me Sunshine. Oh, excuse me, You Brought Me Sunshine. Sorry, the English. You Brought Me Sunshine is the name of that video. This person is Ann Lynn Smith. She did research and found several black slave songs and translated them into ASL. They're fabulous if you have the chance to watch them. Some of the words I have no idea how to pronounce, such as AAVM. Some of the words that the slaves used and were documented are really hard to understand, but they were used in place of potatoes, corn, and were just pronounced differently at the time. Here's a little clip from that video. In white deaf communities or white ASL communities, there isn't much of an appreciation for music. I mean, they are focused on things like the national anthem, and those translations are fine, but most of their music, I would say, is hearing mainstream music that's been translated into ASL. Now, Black ASL communities are similar in that they like translating music into sign language, but if you compare the signing in Black ASL and standard ASL videos, they're incredibly different. Thank you all so much.